Welcome. The purpose of this lesson is to analyze the symbols and events found within Alan's nightmare in order to gain a better understanding of his psyche before the events of the game. At the beginning of any story, there is always one question that hangs in the air. Who is this character, and what drives them? Most of the time, the answer is not given right away, and it is only in sharing adventures with this character that we learn who they really are. Within the story of AlanWake, however, everything we need to know about what drives him as a person is told to us in the prologue. The entire nightmare sequence that takes up the first 15 minutes of the game is centered around informing the player who Alan is and what issues he is currently struggling with. This information is encoded into the level design and events of the dream that Alan finds himself in. Normally, to understand another human being, we must be intimately familiar with them. In this story, the writers give us a shortcut to allow us to view Alan's psyche immediately. In the end, what is more intimate than bearing witness to the dream of another? In the previous lesson, we mentioned briefly the importance of the subconscious mind. The subconscious is a part of what makes each of us a unique being. As such, being familiar with the subconscious of another would allow one to understand that individual with greater clarity. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung described the psyche as being the totality of all psychic processes, conscious as well as unconscious. While in modern times we compare the psyche to the mind and mental processes, it was once described as the soul or the essence of a living being. In Hinduism, this concept is referred to as the Jiva Atman. We will come back to that later. The psyche is divided into two primary parts, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. As it sounds, the conscious mind governs memories, emotions, and thought processes that we are consciously able to recall. However, the conscious mind is only the tip of the iceberg. It is the unconscious mind that contains the vast majority of our psyche. Again, as it sounds, the unconscious holds all of the information that we are not able to consciously recall. According to researchers, the unconscious mind processes between 200 million and 400 billion bits of information at any given time. Out of this number, how much do you think we are consciously aware of? On average, our minds are only capable of processing between 40 and 2,000 bits of information at any given time. Most psychologists estimate that 95 to 99% of our mental processes occur within our unconscious mind and are not known to us. Carl Jung described the unconscious mind as consisting of two distinct parts as well, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The term personal unconscious was coined by Jung and is defined as follows: everything of which I know, but of which I am not at that moment thinking. Everything of which I was once conscious, but have now forgotten. Everything perceived by my senses, but not noted by my conscious mind. Everything which, involuntarily and without paying attention to it, I feel, think, remember, want, and do. All the future things which are taking shape in me and will sometimes come to consciousness. All of this is the content of the unconscious. Besides these, we must include all more or less intentional repressions of painful thought and feelings. I call the sum of these contents the personal unconscious. The personal unconscious contains every bit of information our minds have ever processed in our lives. It, however, exists in a part of the psyche that is not readily available to be consciously recalled. Conversely, the collective unconscious portion of our psyche is much older. This part of our mind is occupied by archetypes, symbols, and instinct. The contents of the collective unconscious contain structures that are universal to all members of the same species. Archetypes like the hero, the jester, or the sage are images that our unconscious minds universally understand. How we consciously perceive these universal symbols, however, can be altered based upon the contents of our personal unconscious. Every human being has a unique experience throughout their lives, so by definition, the world of their personal unconscious would be unique as well. As a result, a symbol or archetype can mean one thing to an individual and something different to another. The symbol of a sword can invoke feelings of safety and the image of a guardian to one person, or the sense of strife and thoughts of an invader to another. With this in mind, there are two primary ways the story of AlanWake has us view the personal unconscious of our protagonist. The first method of viewing Alan's unconscious is through his creations. As we established in Lesson 1, the inspiration for works of art reside within the psyche. Every artist leaves behind a piece of their psyche within their creation. Before proceeding further, I want to state that we will be delving into spoiler territory from here on forward. If you have not played the game before, I recommend pausing here and obtaining a copy so that you can experience it for yourself. In the AlanWake files, Clay Stewart states, Wake's fiction itself remains charged by his own unique psyche and the doubts and fears he contends with. Wake could not escape himself through fiction. If anything, his fiction reflected a deeper version of himself. He goes on to make the assessment that, quote, stories of fractured father-son relationships, end quote, became a staple of his works. Within his first published story, Errand Boy, the father, Willem Carey, had never been involved in his son Daniel's life. In Departure, a similar theme can be seen. While Thomas Zane is not a biological father to Alan, he does play the role of the absent father figure. In this case, he is the archetypal stand-in for one. Zane is an older writer who shows up multiple times throughout the narrative to instruct him and protect him from the dark presence. In both cases of Thomas Zane and Willem Carey, a second similar theme can be seen. Their stories made it clear that both were not simply absentee father figures, but they were absent for a purpose. Willem was absent in order to keep Daniel safe from the crew of the Brigantine Lady. Zane was absent because he had to write himself out of existence and into the dark place in order to prevent the dark presence from spreading out across the face of the earth. Alan desperately wants to make sense of his own father leaving him before he had a chance to know him. His works of fiction reflect his unconscious desire to rationalize why his father abandoned him as an infant. These fantasies that bubble up from his personal unconscious allow him to find a sense of solace. My daddy didn't leave me. He was forced to leave, and there must be a good reason. The fact that this has become a running theme in Alan's work only proves that despite this, the pain of being abandoned can never truly be washed away. After all, the personal unconscious never forgets, no matter how hard we try to repress those emotions. The second method that is used to examine Alan's psyche is within the nightmare sequence that acts as our prologue. Our dream life occurs when our conscious mind is relaxed to the point where it dips below the surface into the realm of the unconscious. A dreamscape is a 3D world we create while dreaming and consists of the disjointed aspects of our unconscious mind. It is the visualization of our internal world of chaos that I mentioned in Lesson 1. The story of AlanWake opens with a dream, in which his personal unconscious is laid bare. All we require is dream logic and a bit of psychology to read it. The first thing Alan experiences is ramming into a hitchhiker and the body vanishing when he looks away. If we walk around behind the vehicle, we can see that the trunk of the car was full of copies of The Sudden Stop. This is the final novel in his Alex Casey series that culminated in the death of the protagonist. These two details are closely related. Dreaming of things that are kept in the trunk of a vehicle has two interpretations. Either they are necessary items that are required for us to reach our goals, or dead weight that serves no further purpose and drag us down. Based upon events later in the nightmare, I choose to use the latter option. The hitchhiker acts as a twofold metaphor. Alan mentions that he's a character in a book he is writing, but he has been unable to write for 2 years since The Sudden Stop was published. In the novelization of AlanWake by Rick Burroughs, he expands on this comment, and we learn the hitchhiker was a character in one of the first stories he started working on. Quote, "An innocent man run down at the start of the story, a driver walking away into the night." Alan had never finished the story. Through the law of associative memory, which is the memory's tendency to branch out to related memories and emotions when a stimulus is provided, it is likely that Alan used the hitchhiker as an archetypal stand-in for Alex Casey, both being characters he's killed off without resolution to their story. A hitchhiker is also a metaphor for something you carry along with you. Much like the contents of a trunk, when we drive down the road of life, we always carry things down with us and pick new things up along the way. It is my assessment that Alex Casey and The Sudden Stop are both psychological hitchhikers in Alan's psyche that will never leave him. Further down the path, Alan finds missing posters littered around. They all contain images of his own face and were the ones found on the cardboard cutout used to advertise The Sudden Stop. This represents Alan's professional persona. The persona is an aspect of the psyche as well. It does not reflect our true self, but is merely a mask that we wear and show to the world. Alan fears his persona as the successful novelist is missing, and he is actively attempting to find it again. To accent his fear, the hitchhiker begins to pursue Alan and ridicules his artistic talent.
"You're a joke. There would be a single readable sentence in your books if it wasn't for your editor. You'll never publish another one of your shitty stories, 'cause I'm gonna kill you. It's not like your stories are any good. Not like they have any artistic merit. You're a lousy writer. Cheap thrills and pretentious shit. That's all you're good for. Just look at me. Look at your work."
Once his greatest works and persona are stripped away, Alan is just a man, nothing more. It doesn't go unnoticed that once the tornado appears near the lighthouse, half of the billboard advertising The Sudden Stop is torn away. The image of his novel is removed, leaving behind only his name. Tornadoes, within a dream, can symbolize an uncontrollable internal or external force that comes to disrupt your path in life or the terrain of your psyche. As we have seen, both internal and external upheaval has blown away his persona and left behind something unrecognizable. The last symbol within the nightmare is the lighthouse located at Rain Cove Point. A lighthouse can be a symbol of salvation and safety. As Rain Cove Point exists within Bright Falls, it is likely Alice's influence on his psyche that is at play. She takes him away on vacation to a place of safety, devoid of anxiety over his writer's block. The light, however, goes out almost immediately upon entering. This may be a premonition that the respite of his vacation at Bright Falls with his wife will quickly be snatched away. Now that we have addressed the native elements of Alan's psyche, it is time we examine the two foreign occupants of the dream. These would be Thomas Zane and Clay Stewart. Alan had no way of knowing either of these two men, so the fact that they appear in his personal subconscious at all is a mystery. Zane had been written out of existence, and Stewart was a library assistant in Madison, Wisconsin. If there was no direct contact between them, how did these two individuals end up in Alan's mind? Earlier on in the lesson, I mentioned the Jiva Atman, or personal soul. In Hinduism, there are two types of souls, the Jiva Atman and the Param Atman. Within the Vedic religion, which is an ancestor to Hinduism, a parable is told that illustrates the relationship between the two. Two birds land on a fruit-bearing tree. One is named Jiva, the other Paramatman. Jiva becomes distracted by a fruit and consumes it while Paramatman looks on without partaking in the meal. The fruit represents the temptation of Maya, and eating it equates to succumbing to the allure of physical or sensual pleasure. This act means the spiritual death of Jiva, and the birth into the manifest world we experience within this life. Param Atman, who did not succumb to the temptation of Maya, is therefore not distracted by the physical world and represents our higher consciousness. Both birds reside within each of us, Shiva being the part of us distracted by this world, and Paramatman, which is concerned with spiritual matters and is our link back to the Brahman. As mentioned in Lesson 1, if Brahma is the creator, then Brahman is the creation. It constitutes the ultimate reality of the universe that encompasses everything. It can be considered that within the Brahman, the consciousness of all beings are one. With this in mind, we can return to Alan. Even though the nightmare is a visualization of Alan's personal psyche, he can commune with the Jiva of others by means of his Paramatman. Because the conscious mind can only process up to 2,000 bits of information at once, this information can only be found within Alan's unconscious mind. Only within the dream can Alan be aware of the other minds that are communing with him. An example of this is shown at the Cauldron Lake Lodge. Rudolph Lane is a resident of the lodge and was completely blocked from producing new paintings. However, after Alan arrived in Bright Falls, he began to produce dark pieces that contained images of the Taken. Lane began to paint images that were contained in Alan's personal unconscious, even though the two had never met. Dr. Hartman even comments in one of his recordings that Rudolph may be tuning into Alan's mind and illustrating it through unconscious means. Rudolph is unaware that these images originated from outside of himself, as he is not able to have conscious knowledge of how his psyche is linked to Alan's. It should at this point be apparent how Zane and Stewart are present in Alan's dream. Thomas Zane states, "I entered your dream to teach you," and later, "That is all, I will give you back your dream now." Zane is clearly informing Alan that he is a foreign body within his dreamscape. In Clay Stewart's case, he has been having reoccurring nightmares about being trapped in the woods with a mysterious stranger. Most of these nightmares culminate in his death, and upon waking, he is confused who the man in his dream was. One night while channel surfing, he slipped into a semi-unconscious state while watching reruns of Night Springs. In his words, "In the twilight between dreaming and waking, I hear the voice of the man from my dreams." A TV interview was playing involving the man he had been dreaming about for months. It was only then that he discovered who AlanWake was. After Alan's disappearance at the end of the game, Stewart made a pilgrimage to Bright Falls in order to determine what happened there. When analyzing a dream, we must always be conscious of what aspects are native to the dreamer's psyche and what foreign influences come from the minds of another. It is time to answer the question posed at the beginning of this lesson. Who is AlanWake and what drives him? AlanWake is an author who rose to celebrity status. A persona was created around him that spurred the success of his novels. Please note that the publications of his novels displayed larger, more prominent text for his name than it did for the title of the book itself. The persona of AlanWake was more important than the books themselves. With the death of his protagonist, Alex Casey, Alan was unable to write anything new. As time went on, his persona became lost. With his agent, his wife, and the public's demands for something new were more insistent, Alan began to sink deeper beneath the waves of his own frustration, the pressure building with every passing minute. Alan became increasingly volatile, prone to outbursts when asked to write anything. Anger, after all, is a common response when our persona is questioned. He descended into a place of severe depression. The story begins with his wife taking him on vacation so that he can avoid his work. Alice aims to pull him up from beneath the waves, only to be dragged down herself. This is the call to action within the hero's journey, the catalyst to push him away from being the man he was at the start of the narrative and towards becoming the man he becomes by the end. This concludes Lesson 2 of our AlanWake Rumination. In the next lesson, we will examine the residents of Bright Falls and discuss the ways in which Alan rewrote their destinies. See you then.